Good evening, friends, and welcome back to The Haunted Tales. Tonight, we're heading deep into the frozen wilderness of Alaska, a place of endless snow, bone-cracking cold, and mysteries that most people never live to talk about. I'll be sharing with you 10 of the most chilling real-life horror stories from the last frontier. These aren't just campfire tales. These are accounts from emergency workers, bush pilots, researchers, and seasonal crews who stumbled into something that should never have been found. In Alaska, the darkness stretches for days. The cold can claim a life in minutes, and what lurks beyond the tree line often has no name. Some of these stories come from old journals and logs, others from recordings and reports that were never meant for the public. Each one is a frozen nightmare waiting to be unearthed. If this is your first time here, welcome to The Haunted Tales. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss when we bring you more true horror stories that will send a shiver straight down your spine. Now, bundle up, because we're about to step into Alaska's darkest secrets. I've been flying bush planes in Alaska for most of my adult life. If you don't know what that means, we're the ones who take supplies, mail, and people out to tiny villages, research stations, and cabins in the middle of nowhere. There are no roads for hundreds of miles in some places, so bush pilots are the only lifeline. I'm used to bad weather, sketchy landings, and long stretches of nothing but snow, trees, and mountains. But a few years ago, I had something happen to me out there in the Alaskan wilderness that I can't explain. Even now, when I think back to it, my stomach knots up and I get that cold sweat feeling, like I'm back in the cockpit hearing that voice come through the static. It was late February, one of the coldest, darkest times of the year. The sun barely climbs over the horizon, and when it does, it's this pale, dim light that doesn't warm anything. I had a run scheduled to drop some supplies out near the Yukon River. Just fuel, canned food, some tools, nothing unusual. The weather was clear when I took off, but in Alaska that doesn't mean much. Things can change fast. About an hour into the flight, I started picking up some static on the radio. At first, I thought nothing of it. Radios out there are finicky, and between the mountains and the atmosphere, you can get interference all the time. But this wasn't just static. Through the crackling, I swear I heard a voice. It was faint, almost buried under the noise, but it was definitely someone trying to call out. I adjusted the frequency, thinking maybe another pilot was nearby, but the channel was empty. Then, as clear as day, I heard it. Mayday, Mayday, is anyone there? I froze. The voice sounded desperate, almost panicked. I responded right away, giving my call sign and asking for their position. There was a pause, then more static, and then, "We need help, please." The weirdest part? The voice sounded old. Not just the tone, but like the transmission itself was from another time. I know that sounds strange, but it had this hollow, grainy quality, like a recording from decades ago. I kept trying to get a fix on their location. Finally, through the garbled mess, I caught a name: Port Calthorpe. My heart skipped. I'd heard that name before. Port Calthorpe was a small settlement way out near the Kuskokwim River, but it had been abandoned since the early 1960s. A flu outbreak wiped out most of the population, and the rest left soon after. No one lived there anymore. I thought maybe I'd misheard, but the voice kept repeating it. "Port Calthorpe, please, we need help." At this point, my hands were sweating on the yoke. I was torn between turning back and investigating. Logic told me it had to be a prank, some weird radio echo, or even my mind playing tricks. But part of me couldn't ignore a distress call, even from a place that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. So I changed course. The further I flew, the worse the weather got. Clouds rolled in out of nowhere, and snow started hammering the windshield. My instruments flickered like they were shorting out. I don't scare easily in the air, but I'll admit I was rattled. After another half hour of fighting through the storm, the clouds broke for just a moment, and below me, I saw it. A cluster of buildings half buried in snow. That had to be Port Calthorpe. From the air, it looked deserted. Roofs caved in, windows shattered, no smoke from any chimneys. Just another ghost town, swallowed by the wilderness. I circled once, debating whether to land. My gut told me to leave. It alone. But then my radio crackled again. This time the voice was clearer. "We see you. Please land." "We need you." My blood ran cold. Whoever it was, they were watching me. I hadn't announced my change in course, hadn't given my coordinates. Yet somehow, they knew I was right above them. Against my better judgment, I sat down on a frozen clearing nearby. The second the engine went quiet, the silence hit me. Out there, miles from the nearest road or living soul, it's a silence that presses on your ears. No birds, no wind, nothing. I climbed out and trudged toward the nearest cabin. Snow crunched under my boots and each step felt heavier than the last. The buildings were in worse shape than they looked from the air. Doors hanging off hinges, glass shattered, whole walls collapsed under decades of storms. But here's the thing that still keeps me up at night. I smelled smoke. Fresh smoke. Like someone had just lit a fire. I followed the scent to one of the larger cabins. The door was half rotted, but when I pushed it open, I swear I saw embers glowing faintly in the fireplace. Not much, just enough to let off a thin curl of smoke. And next to the hearth, in the dust on the floor, were boot prints. Fresh ones. My chest tightened. I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" But my voice just echoed back at me. No answer. Walked through the cabin, every board creaking under my weight. The furniture was old, covered in a thick layer of dust, except for one thing, a chair pulled close to the fire. The seat cushion had the faint imprint of someone sitting there recently. At that point, every instinct screamed at me to leave. I stumbled back outside, and that's when my radio hissed again. "Don't leave us. Not again." The voice was right in my ear, clear as if the person was standing next to me. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped the receiver. I sprinted, back to the plane, heart hammering. As I climbed in, I glanced back at the cabins. For just a second I thought I saw movement, a figure standing in the doorway, watching me. But when I blinked, it was gone. I fired up the engine and took off, not caring about the storm, not caring about the instruments going haywire. I just needed to put as much distance between me and that place as possible. By the time I made it, back to base, I was pale, trembling, and completely drained. I tried to tell one of the other pilots what happened, but the words sounded crazy even as I said them. A distress call from a ghost town. Fresh smoke in a cabin abandoned for 60 years. I pulled the flight recorder the next day to prove it. But here's the kicker. There was no record of any distress calls. Just my own transmissions. Me talking to empty static. And yet, I can still hear that voice when it comes back in my dreams. "We see you. Please land. We need you." I've never flown near Port Calthorpe again. And if you ever find yourself over the Alaskan wilderness and hear a voice on the radio calling for help from a place that shouldn't exist, do yourself a favor. Don't answer. I've been driving long-haul trucks for close to 20 years now. You get used to weird things out on the road. People walking along the highway in the middle of nowhere, lights on the horizon that never seem to move, old diners where the waitress looks like she hasn't aged a day in 30 years. A lot of it you chalk up to fatigue, bad coffee, or just the strangeness of America after midnight. But there's one night I can't explain, no matter how many times I run it through in my head. It happened on a stretch of highway in Nevada that most people don't even know exists. Flat desert, no towns, no gas for 50 miles in either direction, just asphalt cutting straight through the emptiness. I was hauling freight from Reno to Salt Lake City, trying to make good time. It was about 2 in the morning, the kind of hour when even the radio goes quiet. I'd been on the road 12 hours and fatigue was setting in, but not enough to make me hallucinate. At least, that's what I keep telling myself. Around mile marker 47, I noticed a faint glow ahead on the horizon. At first, I figured it was a rest stop or maybe a 24-hour gas station. Relief washed over me. I could use a break, stretch my legs, maybe grab a coffee. Sure enough, as I got closer, I saw the flickering neon sign of an old gas station and diner combo. Looked like something straight out of the 60s. Chipped paint, neon buzzing, EO, single pump out front. The kind of place that probably hadn't changed since Eisenhower was president. I pulled in, parked the rig, and just sat for a minute. Something about it felt off. The lights were on, but there were no cars. No clerk visible behind the counter. Still, I chalked it up to being late, grabbed my wallet, and headed toward the diner. Inside, the place was spotless, but in a strange way, like it had been frozen in time. Vinyl booths, chrome accents, the smell of stale coffee and old grease hanging in the air. A jukebox in the corner hummed quietly, but no music played. "Hello?" I called out. My voice echoed. Nothing. That's when I felt it. This subtle shift, like the air pressure in the room dropped. My ears popped, and for a second I thought maybe a storm was rolling in. But when I glanced outside, the desert was calm, stars bright in the sky. I didn't stick around. Something in my gut told me I shouldn't. I walked back to my truck, climbed in, and pulled onto the highway again. Here's the thing. 10 minutes later, I saw the glow again. Same neon sign, same gas station, same mile marker. My heart sank. I thought maybe I'd looped back somehow, but that didn't make sense. I hadn't turned once. The highway was a straight shot. I checked the GPS. It showed me moving forward just fine. But outside my windshield, there it was. The diner, exactly the same, right down to the flickering letters on the sign. I gripped the wheel tighter and drove past this time, refusing to stop. My chest felt tight, and my palms were sweaty against the leather. I kept my eyes locked ahead, but when I checked my side mirror, I swear I saw movement inside the diner windows. A silhouette standing in the booth where I'd been just minutes before. I floored it, pushing the rig harder than I should have. The road stretched on endlessly, headlights cutting through the darkness. 10, 20, 30 minutes. And then, the glow again. Same diner, same pump, same goddamn neon sign. By then, I was shaking. My first thought was that I was overtired, maybe nodding off and dreaming with my eyes open. But the hum of the engine, the ache in my back, the cold air blasting from the vent, it all felt too real. This time, I slowed down as I passed. I forced myself to look inside the diner as I rolled by, and that's when I nearly lost control of the truck. Sitting in the front booth was me. Same jacket, same ball cap, hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. My head was turned toward the window, staring directly at my passing rig. My stomach dropped into my boots. I slammed the accelerator and didn't look back. The next half hour is a blur. My thoughts were a mess. Was I dreaming? Dead? Losing my mind? Every instinct screamed to keep going, not to stop, not to even think about pulling over. But at exactly mile marker 47, the glow appeared again. My chest tightened so bad I thought I was having a heart attack. This time, the diner looked different. The windows were dark, the sign completely burned out, the whole building sagging like it hadn't seen life in decades. As I passed, my headlights swept over the parking lot, and that's when I saw it, my own truck. Same company logo, same dent in the fender, same trailer. Parked right there in the dirt, door hanging open. I slammed on the brakes, tires screaming, and just sat in the cab with my heart pounding in my throat. I couldn't bring myself to look directly at it. Every hair on my body stood on end. I knew, in that deep animal way you just know some things, that if I got out of my truck, I wouldn't be coming back, so I didn't. I eased off the brake, gripped the wheel with white knuckles, and drove. I don't know how long, an hour, 2, maybe more. My eyes never left the horizon, and finally, I saw the glow of a real gas station. Bright, modern, full of cars, music spilling out from the speakers. I pulled in, stumbled out of the cab, and nearly collapsed on the pavement. The clerk came running out, asking if I was okay. I must have looked like hell, drenched in sweat and pale as a sheet. I asked him where I was. He told me I was just outside Ely. That meant I'd been driving nearly 4 hours since Reno, right on schedule. No loops, no time lost. But here's what I can't shake. When I went back to the rig to grab my logbook, I noticed something on the passenger seat. A coffee cup, white ceramic. Cold, but with a ring of brown at the bottom, like it had been full. Not long ago, the same cup I saw in the diner. I don't drive that route anymore. If I can help it, I'll never see mile marker 47 again. But sometimes late at night, when I'm on some other dark highway and my eyelids are heavy, I'll glance in the side mirror. And for just a second, I swear I see myself staring back, coffee cup in hand, waiting for me to stop. I worked as a seasonal park ranger in Alaska for a couple of winters. Most people picture rangers as walking trails, giving directions to tourists, or pointing out wildlife. But the winter assignments are different. When the parks close for the season, someone still has to stay out at the remote cabins, keep watch, check equipment, and make sure the place doesn't completely fall apart. That's how I ended up alone in a ranger outpost, miles from the nearest road, in the dead of winter. This cabin was small, just one room, a wood stove, bunk, and a shortwave radio. Supplies came every couple of weeks, weather permitting, and otherwise it was just me, the trees, and endless snow. I'm not the kind of guy who minds solitude. I actually like it. But too much isolation does something to your head, especially when the sun only shows up for a few hours a day. The first week was fine. I kept busy, chopped wood, logged reports. Nights were quiet except for the occasional wolf howl echoing through the valley. But by the second week, things started feeling wrong. It began with the scratching. The first night I heard it, I thought it was just branches scraping against the cabin walls. But the sound was too deliberate. Slow, dragging scratches, like something with claws was circling me in the dark. I grabbed my flashlight and went outside. Nothing. Just the snow reflecting back, smooth and untouched. The next morning I checked again. That's when I saw them. Footprints. Bare human footprints, circling the cabin. No shoes, no socks. Just bare feet pressed into the snow, leading nowhere. They started at the tree line, looped around the cabin, and stopped. Not a single trail leading away. My blood went cold. Temperatures had been below zero for days. No one could walk barefoot out there and survive. And yet, the prints were fresh. I radioed in, mentioned it to my supervisor. He laughed it off, said I'd probably seen animal tracks distorted by melting snow. I wanted to believe that, but I knew what I saw. The scratching came back the next night, louder this time, like fingernails raking across the wood right outside my bunk. I barely slept, clutching my flashlight like a weapon. At some point, exhaustion must have dragged me under, because I woke up to silence and a dead fire. That morning, there were no prints, just smooth snow, as if whatever had made them the day before had erased itself. By the third night, things escalated. I was eating dinner when the radio crackled to life. I hadn't touched it. It wasn't even on my frequency. A burst of static filled the cabin. Then a voice. It was my voice. It repeated the report I'd sent earlier that day. Word for word. Same pauses. Same tone. I sat frozen, spoon halfway to my mouth, listening to myself talk from the radio. When the message ended, there was just silence. I yanked the cord from the wall and sat in the dark, heart pounding. I didn't sleep at all. From then on, it felt like the cabin was shrinking around me. Every shadow seemed too long. Every creak in the wood felt like footsteps. I stopped going outside at night, stopped checking the prints. I didn't want to know anymore. But the thing about fear is it finds a way in. One morning, I woke up and noticed the door was open. Just a crack, but enough to let in a sliver of icy wind. My stomach dropped. I always bolted that door. Always. I jumped up, slammed it shut, checked the lock 3 times. Then I saw it. On the floor by the doorframe. Wet footprints. Human, bare feet again. Only this time, they were inside. I felt like I couldn't breathe. My eyes darted around the cabin, every corner, every shadow. I grabbed the hatchet by the stove and tore through the place. Nothing. No one. But the prints were there, melting slowly into the wood. I didn't eat that day. Didn't sleep either. I just sat on the bunk with the hatchet across my lap, staring at the door. That night, the scratching didn't come from outside. It came from under the floorboards. Slow, steady, dragging scratches, right beneath where I sat. I could feel the vibrations through my boots. At some point, the sound stopped, replaced by breathing. Heavy, ragged breathing, as if someone was lying flat under the floor, trying to match my own breaths. I pressed my hands over my ears, rocking like a child, praying for dawn. When the first light hit, the sound was gone. But the footprints were back, circling the cabin inside this time, around the bunk, around the stove, around me. I wanted to call it in, beg for an airlift, but I couldn't bring myself to touch the radio, not after hearing my own voice on it. Final night is the one that broke me. I was half delirious, staring into the dying fire, when I noticed something. My boots. They weren't by the door where I'd left them. They were sitting in the middle of the floor, and there were fresh, wet footprints leading away from them, straight to the bunk where I was lying. My hands shook so bad I nearly dropped the hatchet. The print stopped right at the side of the bed, right where my head rested on the pillow. I don't remember falling asleep. I don't remember anything after that moment, until sunlight streamed through the window and I was still there, alive, the cabin quiet. When my relief finally arrived 2 days later, I didn't say much. Just packed my gear and left. The new guy laughed, called me pale and jumpy, said the isolation must have gotten to me. But as I was boarding the helicopter, I glanced back at the cabin. For just a second, I swore I saw someone standing in the doorway. Not a ranger, not anyone I knew. Just a figure, barefoot, watching me leave. I never went back for another winter shift, and I don't care what anyone says. Isolation didn't put those footprints inside the cabin. Something else did. I used to drive the ice roads up north in Canada, the kind that stretch across frozen lakes in the dead of winter. It's dangerous work, but it pays well. You haul supplies to mining camps in remote communities, places you can only reach by truck when the lakes are frozen solid enough to hold 40 tons of steel and cargo. The first time you drive on one, it feels wrong. Your tires hum over the ice, and all you can think about is the dark water beneath, waiting to swallow you whole if anything goes wrong. Even after years of it, that thought never really leaves your mind. This happened on a run in January, maybe. 10 years ago, temperatures were brutal, close to 40 below. The air stung your lungs just stepping out of the cab. My haul was fuel drums, heavy stuff, which made me nervous on the thinner stretches of ice. The company had rules drilled into us. No sudden stops, no sharp turns, and above all, no driving too close together. The weight of 2 trucks could crack the surface if they weren't spaced out. Usually you drove alone with miles of empty road between you and the next guy. That night, I was alone on a stretch of frozen lake, nothing but darkness in every direction. My headlights lit the narrow lane plowed into the snow, and beyond that was just endless white. The only sound was the groan of the ice beneath my wheels and the occasional crack that echoed like a gunshot. About halfway across, I noticed lights in my mirror. At first I thought I was imagining it, a faint glow way back on the road behind me. But as I kept checking, I realized it was another set of headlights. That didn't make sense. Dispatch staggered us by at least half an hour. There shouldn't have been anyone within 20 miles of me. I picked up the radio. Breaker, this is northbound on Lake Route 7. Who's back there? Static. I tried again. Nothing. The lights kept gaining, slow but steady. Too steady. Whoever it was, they were driving way too close for ice road protocol. I eased the throttle, hoping they'd back off, but the lights matched my pace exactly. If I slowed, they slowed. If I sped up, they sped up. It felt like a game of cat, and mouse, except I had no idea who was behind the wheel. The radio crackled suddenly. For a split second, I thought they were finally answering me. But it wasn't a voice, just this low, distorted sound, like someone breathing right into the mic. Long, ragged breaths that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Then, silence again. My palms were slick on the wheel. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it over the hum of the engine. I told myself it was another driver messing around, maybe someone who'd broken protocol. But that didn't explain the radio, or why I couldn't raise dispatch. The lights stayed with me for nearly 10 miles, always the same distance, just close enough to keep me on edge. Sometimes they flickered, like the beams were cutting through. Falling snow, but the road behind me was clear. Finally, I had enough. I pulled off into a wide section of the road, one of the designated passing spots. I stopped, shifted into neutral, and waited. The ice groaned under the weight of my truck, cracked spiderwebbing somewhere in the darkness beneath me. I stared into the mirror, waiting for the other truck to pass. But the lights just stopped. They froze in place maybe 100 yards back, glowing faintly through the night. No engine noise, no movement. Just two orbs hanging there in the black. I grabbed the mic again, hand shaking. "You gonna sit back there all night, buddy?" The radio hissed, then that breathing again. Closer this time, louder, like it was coming from inside my cab. I dropped the mic like it burned me and slammed the truck back into gear. I didn't care about protocol anymore. I barreled forward, tires throwing up slush, the trailer groaning. Behind me, the lights followed, closer now, gaining faster than any loaded truck had a right to. I risked a glance in the mirror and nearly swerved. The beams weren't bouncing on the ice like headlights should. They were floating, perfectly level, too high off the ground. Almost like they weren't attached to anything at all. My mouth went dry. My chest felt tight. Every instinct screamed to keep driving, faster and faster, even as the ice groaned and popped beneath me. For miles, the lights stayed glued to my tail. I prayed to see the far shore, the safety of land. And finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw it, the dim glow of the checkpoint cabin ahead. I didn't stop. I didn't slow down until I was back on solid ground. Only then did I dare check the mirror again. The lights were gone. The relief that washed over me was so strong I almost cried. I pulled into the checkpoint, jumped down from the cab, and staggered inside. My hands were trembling so bad I could barely hold the coffee they gave me. The other drivers trickled in over the next few hours. I asked if anyone had been behind me on the lake. They all shook their heads. According to dispatch logs, I'd been completely alone on that stretch. I tried to explain, but I sounded crazy, even to myself. Nobody believed me. But later, when I went back out to check the truck, I saw something that still makes my skin crawl. The trailer doors, in the frost that had built up during the crossing, were two perfect handprints. Bare hands, no gloves, pressed deep into the ice. They weren't mine. I grew up in Montana, and after high school, I took whatever work I could find. For a while, that meant working for a small surveying company. Most of the jobs were boring, mapping out farmland, checking boundaries for new construction, that kind of thing. But every now and then, we'd get sent somewhere unusual. That's how I ended up in Blackwood. Blackwood was once a mining town up in the mountains. Back in the late 1800s, it was full of life. Miners, families, saloons, even a schoolhouse. But like most of those boom towns, when the ore ran out, so did the people. It had been abandoned for close to a century by the time we went there. Our job was simple: survey the land for a company that wanted to buy the mineral rights. They weren't looking for gold or silver this time, but rare earths, stuff for electronics. We were told to spend 3 days out there, take measurements, and mark potential sites. I'd heard stories about Blackwood before, ghost town legends, whispers of miners who'd gone missing, strange noises in the shafts. But I chalked it up to campfire talk. I wasn't superstitious, at least not then. There were 3 of us. me, another surveyor named Pete, and our supervisor, Carl. We hiked in with our gear and set up camp in what used to be the town square. The buildings were in rough shape, but you could still make out the old storefronts, the saloon with its swinging doors hanging crooked, the church steeple tilting to one side. That first night was quiet. Too quiet, actually. No animals, no wind. Just this heavy stillness that settled over everything once the sun went down. Around midnight, I woke up to a sound that made my skin crawl. Hammers. The faint rhythmic clink of pickaxes striking stone. It echoed through the valley like it was coming from underground. I sat up in my tent, heart racing, listening. The sound went on for maybe a minute, then stopped. I told myself it had to be my imagination, maybe an echo of something else. But when I mentioned it the next morning, Pete's face went pale. He'd heard it too. Carl brushed us off. "Old shafts shift and creak," he said. "Probably just rocks falling. Don't spook yourselves." We let it go, but I couldn't shake it. The second day, we split up to cover more ground. I took the northern ridge, marking coordinates and snapping photos. The sun was bright, but in the shadows of the mountains it felt colder than it should have. At one point, I stumbled on an old mine shaft. The boards covering the entrance were half rotted, gaps wide enough to see into the darkness beyond. Curiosity got the better of me. I crouched down, peered inside, and froze. Someone was standing there. Deep in the tunnel, maybe 20 feet back, I saw the outline of a man. Still as stone, head bowed, hands at his sides. I blinked, and the shape was gone. Just shadows and rock. I scrambled back, nearly tripping over my own boots. My heart was hammering so hard I felt dizzy. I didn't stick around. That night, we built a fire and tried to shake off the unease. Carl teased us about being jumpy, but even he looked unsettled when the hammers started again. Louder this time. Clearer. Like half a dozen men were working right beneath our feet. Pete whispered, "It's like they never left." None of us slept. On the third day, everything unraveled. We woke to find Pete's tent empty. His gear was still there, boots and all, but he was gone. We searched the whole town, calling his name until our throats were raw. No tracks in the snow, no sign of struggle, just gone. Carl was furious, muttering about negligence, but I saw the fear in his eyes. We packed up fast, ready to head back down the mountain. But as we were leaving, I heard it again. The hammers. Only now, there were voices too. Faint at first, like whispers carried on the wind. Then clearer. Men shouting to each other, calling out commands. The sound of labor, of a mine in full swing. Carl froze beside me, his face pale as ash. "You hear that?" he whispered. We both stood there listening. The noise was coming from the direction of the old shaft I'd found. Without thinking, Carl started toward it. I grabbed his arm. "Don't. Just don't." But he shook me off and kept walking, drawn like a moth to flame. I yelled after him, but he didn't even turn his head. By the time I caught up, he was standing at the mouth of the shaft, staring into the dark. His lips were moving, like he was answering someone I couldn't hear. I swear to God, I saw a hand reach out from the shadows. A filthy, calloused hand, fingers curled like claws, stretching toward him. Carl stepped forward. I tackled him, dragged him back, kicking and screaming. By the time I got him on his feet, the shaft was silent again. Just an empty hole in the mountain. We didn't wait. We abandoned half our gear and bolted down the trail, not stopping until the town was far behind us. When we finally made it back to the ranger station, Carl refused to talk about what happened. He put in his report that Pete wandered off and was lost in the terrain, but I know that's not true. They never found Pete's body. Sometimes late at night I hear it again. The hammers, the shouts, the endless work of men who should have been dead 100 years ago. And I wonder if Pete is down there with them now. I used to work as a 911 dispatcher in Nevada. It's not a glamorous job, but it's one that gets under your skin. You hear people at their worst, Car crashes, shootings, fires, and sometimes calls you can't explain. This happened in 2012. I'd been on night shift for a couple of years, stationed in a small call center that handled everything from Vegas to the rural desert highways. Nights were long and quiet for the most part. Calls came in waves, some drunk fights, an accident or two. Then hours of silence where all you could hear was the hum of the fluorescents. Around 2:30 a.m., I got a call that still haunts me. The line lit up. I clicked my headset and said, 911, what's your emergency? At first, I thought no one was there, just static. Then I heard it. A woman's voice, faint, shaking. Please, help. Me. He won't let me leave. I straightened in my chair. Ma'am, where are you? Can you tell me your location? Silence. Then a whisper. Highway 93, mile marker 45. My stomach dropped. Highway 93 is long, empty, and dangerous at night. I knew that stretch well. No towns for miles, just desert and darkness. Okay, I said calmly. Are you in a vehicle? She paused. Yes, he's driving. Her voice cracked on the last word. I motioned to the duty officer who started tracing the call. But in the desert, reception is bad, and it was bouncing off towers. The location wasn't exact. Can you tell me what kind of car you're in? I asked. Silence again. Then, in that same trembling whisper, it's not his car. The line went dead. We scrambled. State troopers were dispatched to Highway 93, lights cutting through the desert night. I stayed glued to the phone, praying she'd call back. 15 minutes later, she did. Same number. Same weak signal. Her breathing was ragged, like she'd been crying. Ma'am, we have officers en route, I told her. Stay on the line with me. She whispered, He knows. He knows I called. In the background, I heard something. A man's voice, low and angry, though I couldn't make out the words. Then a sound like the phone being fumbled, muffled against fabric. I shouted into my headset, Ma'am, are you still there? For a long moment, nothing. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. She whispered directly into the phone. So quiet I almost missed it. He's not alive. The line cut again. I felt my chest tighten. The troopers were still searching, scanning mile after mile of empty blacktop. No sign of a vehicle. No stranded motorists. Nothing. Half an hour later, the phone rang a third time. I answered immediately, hands shaking. But this time, it wasn't the woman. It was the man. His voice was deep, calm, almost polite. Stop looking. That's all, he said before the call disconnected. I sat frozen, headset still pressed to my ear, my whole body cold. I told the troopers what I'd heard, but the number couldn't be traced anymore. It had gone dark. They combed that stretch of Highway 93. Until dawn, they found nothing. No car, no tire tracks, no woman, no man. The number was checked later. It wasn't registered to anyone. In fact, records showed it hadn't been active in over a year. I've taken thousands of calls in my career, but that one sits in the back of my mind. Sometimes, late on shift, when the phones are quiet and the desert outside feels endless, I'll hear static crackle in my headset. And for a second, I swear I hear her voice again. Please, help me. He won't. Let me leave. And I know somewhere out there on Highway 93, that car is still driving. I worked for the railroad for nearly 15 years. Nights, weekends, holidays. Trains don't stop running just because the world is asleep. Most of my shifts were uneventful. Routine inspections, logging departures, making sure switches and signals were working. But there was one night at a remote signal tower in Wyoming that I can't explain. I've tried, but nothing makes sense of it. The tower sat about 20 miles outside a small town, surrounded by empty prairie. A single 2-lane road led out to it, and most nights I was the only person for miles. My job was to monitor the main line, log train movements, and make sure the signals stayed operational. It was lonely work, but I didn't mind. This particular night was bitter cold. The wind cut straight through my coat, rattling the metal siding of the tower. Inside, the heater hummed and the fluorescent lights buzzed. I had a thermos of coffee, and the radio tuned low. Just another graveyard shift. Around 1 a.m., I noticed the eastbound signal flicker. Just a quick blink, like the power had hiccuped. I logged it, figuring it was nothing. Equipment out there was old and temperamental. But then it blinked again. And again. A steady rhythmic pulse, like someone was tapping the light. I picked up the radio, called dispatch. Control, this is Tower 17. You reading a fluctuation on eastbound? A pause. Then, negative Tower 17. Board's all green. I frowned. If the main board showed normal, but I was seeing a flicker, that meant it wasn't electrical. Someone had to be out there. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside. The cold hit me like a wall. My breath hung in the air, carried off by the wind. The prairie was pitch black, broken only by the faint glow of the signal down the track. I trudged through the snow, boots crunching, light sweeping ahead. The closer I got, the more uneasy I felt. The signal wasn't just flickering, it was pulsing in a pattern. 3 quick flashes, pause, 2 slow flashes, over and over, like Morse code. I didn't know Morse, but the rhythm was too deliberate to be random. I stopped about 20 feet from the base, scanning the area. Nothing but frozen grass and steel rails stretching into the dark. "Hello?" I called out. My voice was swallowed by the wind. The signal blinked again. 3 short, 2 long, right at me. I swallowed hard, the hairs on my neck standing up. My gut screamed to turn back, but I forced myself closer. The ladder leading up the signal post rattled in the wind. I swept my flashlight across the base. That's when I saw them. Footprints, bare feet, dozens of them, pressed deep into the snow, circling the base of the signal. The skin must have frozen instantly, but whoever, or whatever, left them had kept walking. My stomach flipped. I backed away fast, nearly tripping over the rail. When I looked back up, the light had stopped, flickering. Just a steady green glow, like nothing had happened. I didn't sleep the rest of the shift. By dawn, I'd convinced myself I was tired, seeing patterns in nothing. But when I went to log the night, the pen in my hand froze. On the page, in my own handwriting, were the words, "Stop him before he gets on." I hadn't written that. I swear I hadn't. My notes were always neat, careful, but those words were scrawled, jagged, like they'd been written in a rush. I closed the logbook, shoved it in the drawer, and tried to forget. 2 nights later, it happened again. The eastbound signal pulsed the same pattern, only this time it was faster, more urgent. I refused to go out there. I just sat at my desk, staring at the light through the window. At 2:15 a.m., the ground began to rumble. An eastbound freight rolled through, over 100 cars long. As it passed the signal, I thought I saw movement between the cars, a figure darting from shadow to shadow. I leaned forward, pressing my face to the glass. That's when I saw him, a man clinging to the side of one of the cars, skin gray, hair matted, eyes wide and staring right at the tower. His mouth moved, like he was screaming, but the roar of the train swallowed everything. I stumbled back from the window, heart in my throat. When I looked again, he was gone. The train thundered past, disappearing into the horizon. The signal returned to normal, steady green. I didn't log a thing that night. The next morning I checked the book again. Another message had appeared on the page where my hand had rested. Too late. I quit a month later. Couldn't bring myself to do another night out there. Sometimes when I drive past the old line, I see the signals flicker. 3 short, 2 long. Always the same pattern. And I wonder if that man is still out there, clinging to the endless freight, trying to warn whoever will listen. I worked for the U.S. Forest Service for almost a decade, stationed mostly in the Pacific Northwest. My job was a mix of trail maintenance, fire watch, and the occasional search and rescue. You spend enough time in the woods, you start to think. You've seen it all. Storms rolling in out of nowhere, cougars shadowing you just out of sight, even hikers losing their minds from exhaustion. But nothing prepared me for what I heard one summer out in the pines. It was late July, peak fire season, and I was assigned to a remote fire lookout about 30 miles from the nearest town. Basically a cabin on stilts, perched above the tree line with a 360-degree view. Beautiful, but isolated. I'd be up there for 2 weeks at a time, radioing in weather reports and scanning for smoke. My third night in, the forest was unusually still. No owls, no crickets, not even the wind through the trees. Just this heavy, suffocating silence. I was writing in my logbook when I heard it, faint at first, like a trick of the ears. Voices. I froze, pen halfway across the page. They drifted up through the pines, carried on the still night air. Dozens of them, overlapping, whispering. Too far away to make out words, but close enough that I knew I wasn't imagining it. I stepped onto the deck of the tower, sweeping my flashlight through the trees below. Nothing but darkness, no campsites, no hikers. Nobody should have been within 10 miles of me. The voices went quiet. I barely slept, ears straining for any sound. The next day was uneventful, clear skies, nothing in the valley. By evening I convinced myself it was just sound carrying weirdly, maybe from a distant camp. But when the sun went down, they came back, this time louder. I pressed my ear to the floorboards, convinced they were right beneath the tower. The whispers rose and fell, almost rhythmic, like a chant. I couldn't make out words, but I swear I felt them in my chest, vibrating in my ribs. I radioed dispatch. "You picking up any chatter near Lookout 9? The line crackled. "Negative. 9, should be dead quiet up there. Dead quiet." I didn't say another word. By the 5th night I was unraveling. The whispers came as soon as the sun dipped, circling the tower, overlapping, growing frantic. I tried shining my spotlight down into the forest, but the voices only laughed. Not loud, not mocking, but this dry rasp that rippled through the pines, like wind through dead needles. At one point, I heard my name, clear as day. "Eli." That broke me. My name isn't common, and hearing it whispered from the treetops in the dead of night nearly sent me over the railing. I backed inside, slammed the shutters closed, and sat in the dark, clutching the radio. Sometime past midnight, the voices stopped. In their place came something worse. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, crunching through the pine needles, circling. The tower. I held my breath, counting each pass. After the 4th or 5th lap, the footsteps stopped at the base. I waited for the creak of the ladder, but it never came. Instead, I heard whispering again. Right below me. I don't remember falling asleep, but I woke at dawn, slumped against the wall, stiff and freezing. My coffee pot had been emptied sometime in the night. I know I hadn't touched it. The last night, everything escalated. The whispers started before dark, louder than ever. The forest itself seemed alive with them. The windows rattled, the walls shook, and through it all, I heard my name again and again. "Eli, Eli," then silence. For a few heartbeats, the whole world held its breath, and then a voice spoke. Not a whisper this time, a clear, calm voice right outside the door of the tower. "Come down." My legs gave out. I crawled to the corner, shaking, eyes locked on the door. The handle twitched once, like someone testing it, then nothing. I must have blacked out, because the next thing I remember is sunlight streaming through the shutters. When I dared open the door, there were no footprints, no sign of anyone. Just the endless forest swaying gently in the morning breeze. I reported nothing. Packed up at the end of my rotation and never volunteered for lookout duty again. To this day, when I hear wind in the pines, sometimes it doesn't sound like wind at all. It sounds like voices calling my name. I used to work the night shift at a little roadside diner off Highway 50 in Nevada. If you've ever driven the loneliest road in America, you know how empty it feels out there. Miles of desert, no lights but the stars, and the occasional trucker rolling through. Our diner sat at mile marker 16, A squat building with flickering neon and a jukebox that hadn't worked in years. Nights were usually dead. Sometimes I'd go 3 or 4 hours without a customer. Just me, the hum of the fridge, and the buzz of the lights overhead. This happened in late October, about 10 years ago. I was working alone that night. Our waitress had called out, so I was pulling double duty, cooking and manning the register. Around 2 a.m., I was wiping down the counter when I saw headlights outside. A car pulled in. An old black sedan, chrome bumper glinting in the neon. It idled for a moment, then the engine cut. I waited for someone to come in. Nobody did. After a couple minutes, I walked to the window and peered out. The car was empty. Doors closed, no movement, like it had parked itself. I told myself the driver probably went to stretch their legs. Still, something about it put me on edge. I went back, behind the counter, and poured myself coffee. That's when the bell over the door jingled. A woman walked in. She looked wrong, not in an obvious way, just slightly off. Her clothes were outdated, a pale dress that looked like it belonged in the 1950s. Her hair was done up in curls, but messy, like she'd slept in it. And her skin was pale. Too pale. She didn't look at me, just walked to a booth and sat down. I grabbed a menu and headed over. "Evening, ma'am. Coffee to start?" She didn't answer, just kept staring. Out the window, hands folded on the table, I set the menu down gently. "We've got eggs, burgers, pie." Her head turned then, slowly, and her eyes met mine. I swear they looked gray, like there was no color in them at all. In a flat voice, she said, "Pie." My throat went dry. "Sure thing. What kind?" She tilted her head like I'd asked a ridiculous question. "Just pie." I nodded, forcing a smile. "Coming right up." Back in the kitchen, my hands shook as I sliced a piece of apple pie and slid it onto a plate. When I returned, she hadn't moved. Just sat perfectly still, eyes fixed on the window again. I set the plate in front of her. "Here you go." She didn't touch it. Minutes ticked by. I pretended to busy myself at the counter, but my eyes kept drifting back. The pie sat untouched. She didn't blink. Finally, I couldn't take it. I walked back over. "Everything all right, ma'am?" Slowly, she turned her head toward me again. This time she smiled. Her teeth were too many. Small, white, perfectly square, crowding her mouth in rows. I stumbled back, knocking into the counter. My heart was slamming against my ribs. When I blinked, the smile was gone. Just her blank face staring at me. The bell jingled suddenly, and I whipped my head toward the door. Nobody was there. When I turned back, the booth was empty. The plate of pie was gone, but the fork was still there, bent completely in half, like someone had crushed it with their bare hand. I ran outside, scanning the lot. The sedan was still parked under the flickering neon. But now, the passenger door was open. The inside was pitch black, darker than it should have been. I couldn't make myself go closer. I just backed slowly into the diner, locked the door, and waited for dawn. By morning, the car was gone. No tire tracks, no sign anyone had ever been there. I quit 2 weeks later. Couldn't bring myself to work nights anymore. Sometimes I drive that stretch of 50, and every now and then, I see headlights in the distance. A black sedan, keeping pace with me in the rear view, never passing, never falling behind. And I swear, if I look too long, I see her sitting in the back seat, smiling. I flew bush planes in Alaska for almost 20 years. If you've never been up there, you can't understand the kind of isolation I'm talking about. Endless forests, jagged mountains, and rivers that look like silver veins cutting through. The wilderness. Once you're in the air, it feels like the rest of the world doesn't exist. Most of my flights were routine, hauling supplies to villages, transporting hunters, or flying medevac runs when the weather allowed. But every pilot has a story they don't talk about. Something that doesn't make sense. This is mine. It was late November, maybe 2008. I'd been contracted to fly a load of equipment to a research station north of the Yukon River. Weather reports weren't great, but the station was low on fuel and food, so I agreed to take the risk. I left Fairbanks just after sunrise, though sunrise up there in November is more like a smear of gray light across the horizon. The air was sharp, the kind that bites your lungs. I remember frost creeping along the edges of the windshield as I climbed. The first hour was fine. Clear skies, smooth air. Then the radio crackled. At first it was just static, faint and broken. I adjusted the dials, thinking it was interference, but then I heard it. A voice. Help. It was faint, distant, like it was being dragged across miles of static. I keyed the mic. Say again, transmission. You're breaking up. More. Static. Then. Lost. Can't find the river. The voice was weak, male, panicked. I tried again. This is November 269er. Identify yourself. No response. I checked my chart. There weren't supposed to be any other flights in that sector. And the way the voice faded in and out, it didn't sound like a normal transmission. More like an echo. The next 20 minutes were tense. The voice would cut in at random, always the same words. Lost. Can't find the river. Help! Each time it sounded closer. I kept trying to answer, but it was like shouting into a void. Then the weather turned. Clouds rolled in fast, swallowing the mountains. Snow hammered the windshield, visibility dropping to almost nothing. I dropped altitude, searching for the Yukon River to guide me. That's when the voice came through again. Clearer now, too clear. You won't find it. I froze. My hand hovered over the throttle. That wasn't a mayday. That was someone talking directly to me. Who is this? I demanded. Identify yourself. No reply. Just heavy static, like breathing in my headset. The storm thickened, my compass spun, instruments glitching. I tried to hold a heading, but everything felt wrong, like the plane was being pulled off course. Then I saw it. Below, through a break in the clouds, was a river. Wide, winding, black against the snow. Relief surged through me. I descended, lining, up to follow it north. But as I dropped lower, something felt off. The river wasn't moving. No ripples, no current. Just a black, glassy surface stretching into the distance. And on the banks, lined up like sentries, were figures, dozens of them. At first I thought they were trees. But trees don't stand in perfect rows. They were tall, thin, motionless. Two, evenly spaced. And as I banked over them, I swear their heads turned upward, toward me. My stomach flipped. I yanked the yoke, climbing back into the storm, heart hammering. When I looked again, the river was gone. Just swirling snow and gray sky. The radio exploded with static. Then, in that same broken voice, "Help. Can't find the river?" I wanted to scream. "I saw it. I saw the damn river. What the hell are you?" But all I got back was laughter. Faint, distorted, crawling across the frequency like oil on water. By some miracle, I broke through the storm an hour later and spotted the real Yukon glinting below. I followed it straight to the station, shaking so bad I could barely land. When I told the researchers what happened, they exchanged uneasy looks. One of them, an older guy, pulled me aside. He told me I wasn't the first pilot to hear that call. Back in the 1970s, a bush plane went down along that route. Never found the wreck, never recovered the pilot, but ever since, every few years, someone reports hearing the same transmission. Lost. Can't find the river. Some even claim to see that black water lined with watching figures. I wanted to believe he was joking, but the look in his eyes told me he wasn't. I never flew that route again. But sometimes when I'm up in the air and the clouds close in, the radio will crackle with static. And faintly, beneath it all, I swear I hear the voice again. Help. Can't find the river. And I know if I ever answer, I might not come back.